It is good to have Mark and Denise visiting with us on their staycation again. We're blessed to have them, as well as their family who's in town, as well as some others who are visiting with us. We hope that your time in Corpus was good. We hope, and we're glad to get to know you a little bit better this morning. This morning, we're going to kind of look at this idea of focus. When over the last week, when I was with my mom and dad, and I remember sitting at the table with them, and I told them, they were kind of asking me kind of what my sermons were going to be about, and kind of talking to me about different things. And I said, well, one of the ideas I had was focus. And everybody at the table began to laugh. Including my wife. I don't know why they started to laugh when I told them that I was going to preach on focus and focusing on something. But I find it interesting that, growing up, one of the things my parents have told me is that when I was in elementary school, when I was growing up, I was diagnosed with ADD, attention deficit disorder. I don't know if you could tell if you know me, but I have ADD. And so I have this experience, but they didn't want to put me on the medicine at the time that would help me pay attention because they were afraid that it would stunt my growth. So they decided that, he's going to play basketball is more important than him paying attention in school. And so they decided not to put me on the medicine, which I find funny. But I had a problem growing up in high school, middle school, elementary school of paying attention. Even today in my life, I have problems paying attention with things that are going on around me. That was unplanned totally. But I have problem paying attention. My wife has this idea where, I start a story and then all of a sudden I go off on a different rabbit trail. And eventually we'll get back to that story, but I have to finish that rabbit trail first. And so we struggle with this concept of focus. We've come to the end of the year, a time where many people will begin to reflect back on their year and were they able to accomplish the resolutions that they had? Were they able to do what they set out for in the year? Did they meet the goal that they had set for them in 2019? And then also at the same time, we begin to look forward to 2020. We here at Weber Road, our banners are still very much up. We have been spending time with this concept of having a heart to start. We've looked throughout the year about ways that you can start something here at Weber Road, ways for you to be involved at Weber Road, ways that you can teach and to minister and to serve here in this congregation and in Corpus Christi. We've looked at different things. Next week, Mark's going to introduce our 2020 theme. I'm not going to touch that 2020 theme, but we've decided over the last couple years to have a centralized focus of things that we need to accomplish as a church and as individuals. And I find it interesting that, when we look at this idea of where to focus and what to focus on, there's really two way different ideas of where we can focus. We can look at the morality side of what the world will say and what humans often try to do in life, and we see a stark contrast to the heavenly focus that we should have in our life. We see people wanting to focus on pleasing others. That sounds like a good concept, right? It sounds like, they're pleasing others. Well, we've lost the sight of that. We lost the perspective of that. We've been too busy focusing on pleasing people that we've lost and we've changed different things. We see this very early on in the narrative of the Exodus of the Israelites leaving Egypt. In Exodus chapter 32, we see the people who are in the very presence of God, who, having seen God being manifested on Mount Sinai and all the glory and all the splendor that is God there, they began to become terrified and they began to shake in their boots, if you will. And Abraham goes up onto Mount Sinai and he begins to have this conversation with God and presents the Ten Commandments to him. He's gone for a while, and then verse 1 of chapter 32 of Exodus, the people have come to Aaron and they have said, "We do not know what has happened to that man." That's my way of putting it. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what happened to Abraham. Maybe he died. Maybe he's still up there. We don't know. But what we want you to do is we want you to make a golden calf that we may worship him. Isn't that odd that they're looking at Mount Sinai, trembling and falling apart, and all the splendor that is God there? They said, we want a golden calf, and Aaron, we want you to make it. You know, if Aaron was a man of any integrity, he would have said, no, I'm not going to do that. But what did he do? He wanted to please the people. He was afraid of the Israelites and what they would do. Doesn't that sound somewhat familiar in our life, in our day and age today? Maybe you've heard of the feel-good gospel. Maybe you've seen those televangelists out there on the TV who are preaching that type of message. Do what pleases you, or say this prayer, or do this, or give money, and God will bless you. Oh, don't worry about that sin. Don't worry about doing that every single Sunday. But do what you want to do. We have this idea of what morality and even is creeping into within the church, saying women can do what they want and have a lead in worship. They become elders and deaconess. We see a push of instruments being involved in church. We see a change in how other people get into salvation, that baptism is not essential for salvation. We see all these different types of things coming into our world, into the church, and it's all about pleasing the masses. Let us change the way that we worship. Let us change what we teach in order to get people flocking to our building. And so they change the doctrine to a feel-good message. It's just what Aaron did at the bottom of Mount Sinai. See, morality will say, and what people will tend to do is try to please people. And there's church leaders and there's church elders who go along with it. I know of a church up in San Antonio of a preacher who got there and began to say that I'm going to take this church where I want it to go. And several years later, 20 to 30 years later, they've taken the Church of Christ right off the building. It's all about pleasing the masses. It's all about what they want to do. It's all about preaching that feel-good message. Let's get these people inside the building and we'll teach them and preach them whatever they want to. It's how morality looks at things. And then we see in 2 Samuel chapter 11 this concept of being self-focused. We see a focus primarily on the self. We know the story in 2 Samuel chapter 11 with David and Bathsheba. We know that for some reason, whatever it may be, David decided to stay home while his army was out at war. And while his country is at war, he's out the roof looking over his kingdom, and then he begins to survey the houses, and he sees this woman bathing on the rooftop. And we see David long for this woman. We see David send to get this woman. And then after she told him that she had conceived a child, David did whatever he could to cover up that sin and eventually led to murder. We see David was primarily worried about himself. He was worried. He wanted to please himself. He wanted to say, yes, I'll take whatever I want to. I am king over Israel. I will do whatever I want. Self-focused. And then when he found out that someone is going to, there's a child that's going to be born, he decided, I have to cover this up. I can't let my name get ruined. So I am going to do whatever I can to cover this sin up so no one else knows and sees what has happened. You know, I did a quick, just thought in my head while I was writing this. Do you see that in Hollywood? One of Jennifer's favorite Christmas movies is the movie Elf. We can't go a holiday season without watching Elf. And I remember I was looked at Elf, and I was thinking about the primary, or the dad, Walter Hobbs. Very early, when we first meet Walter, he's talking to this older lady, and he's like, I don't care about the books. I don't care about the children, but she responds with this sweet little voice, but the kids love the books. And he didn't care. He was willing to overlook. He didn't want to make a negative figure. He didn't want them to understand. He didn't care. He was mostly focused about him and his business and his job. Self-focus. We see in the end of the movie where he was even willing to steal from the infamous Miles Finch when he left that little black book on the table. He was so self-focused, self-driven. And I can go on and on. The other one that popped up in my mind is another favorite Disney movie, Finding Nemo. Where you had Marlin did escape, and he did eventually go off, and he was looking for his child, but he wanted to make sure that it was on his own terms. He didn't let little Nemo live the life that he wanted to live. He was very overprotective. We call them somewhat helicopter pilots in our day. He wanted to protect him because of a dramatic event that occurred to him. Even after Nemo was taken off the reef and Marlin goes and swims, he was even trying to lead Dory in the way that he wanted to go. And eventually that wound him up in the field of jellyfish. And Dory getting shocked, electrocuted, or whatever they do in the jellyfish world, and we see that struggle. He didn't care about her. He wanted, because he was afraid of that channel, that cut in the ocean floor. He was self-focused. He wanted to please himself. Morality will say, do what pleases you. And in today's world, we even have this new mindset of love is love. And it doesn't care who you love as long as you love somebody. And we see this push. It doesn't matter whether you were born with certain gender or whoever you want to become. It's okay. Please yourself. Do what you want to do. Morality will say, please yourself. Focus on your own role in life. If you don't love the spouse that you married, it's okay. Divorce them. Move on. Life falling out of love. Good. Go find someone else. You see the difference between what God says and then what the Hebrew writers in Hebrews 12 says? If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Hebrews chapter 12. We'll see a stark contrast. This is at the tail end of the great hall of faith, the chapter that deals with by faith, so-and-so did this, by faith, they did this, by faith, by faith. And then we pick up in Hebrews chapter 12. And we see here at the very beginning this connecting verse. We said, therefore we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I think the first thing that we can pull from these two verses is the very fact that we need to focus on the race. We are all going through this race in life. We are all trying to reach heaven, the end goal of our life, and we all have different things that go on. So we need to focus on that race. You know, I used to run. I've tried to run. I've tried to lose weight. I've tried to go on diets and different things. And I remember when I ran as a young child, even as a young soldier in the Army, I would set these goals in my head. I would start to run, and I would say, if I reach that driveway, I'll walk, or I'll stop, or I'll slow down. If I can sprint to that telephone pole, I'll slow down. In the Army, we had 30, 60s, and 90s where you sprint for 30 seconds and you jog or walk for 60, and then you sprint for 30 and then you jog for 60. And then we got up to 120s or 60, 120s where you sprint and run for 60 seconds, and then you jog for 120. All that is building endurance. And so we have this idea here. We focus on these little minute goals. We set these ideas in our heads where we say, if we reach that point, we'll go further. If we get to that point, we'll push on. We'll have a little bit of a break. He says we need to focus on that race. And we need to lay aside the weight that easily clings to us. I have a big, huge military rucksack. A backpack, if you will. And I will occasionally pack that full of just random stuff we have laying around the house. Mostly it's Army stuff that I still have. Boots and sleeping bags and different things. And I weigh that pack down and I begin to go off on a march and I begin to walk. And every now and again I will pick up and I will jog just slightly. And I will go for a couple miles. In basic, I remember I went for, our company went for a 12-mile march. We had all this weight that weighed probably close to somewhere 50, 75, some maybe even 100 pounds worth of gear on your back. You carry it 12 miles. And I remember as we're going on these marches, even today, as we're going on this march, we set those little goals. We focus on our journey. We focus on what was going on. But we always, in the back of our mind, knew at some point we were going to drop that weight. Sometimes they called it the rucksack flop, where you just basically flopped down and that weight caught you and you didn't hit the ground. And we were able to take that backpack off. The Hebrew writer here is saying, don't cling so tightly to that weight, that sin, that burden that clings to you. But knowing that burden, knowing that struggle, knowing that the thing that you're dealing with is only going to make you stronger. The purpose of a ruck march is quite simple. It's not just to see and to go through pain and struggle, but it's to build endurance, to build your leg muscles, to build the stamina in your lungs so that you can run further, that you can carry more weight, that you can go and go and go. And that's the purpose of the sin that we have. Yes, sin is horrible, but when we struggle and we face temptation and we face this idea of struggle, that struggle, the reason why James says, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials and tribulations, it's because it produces steadfastness, it produces not the word I'm looking for, endurance. So that's what happens. But we don't need to cling so closely to it. One of the other things that people focus on is that I need to get my life fixed before I can get into heaven. Before I go to church, before I give my life to God, I have to get my life in order. I know what I've done. I know the sin that I have. I know the horrible things that I've done, and they try to fix themselves before they ever come to God. The Hebrew writer says that's not how we need to focus. We need to lay aside those things, and then we need to have a heavy focus on Jesus. We need to have a heavy focus to the founder and perfecter of our faith. We need to have a heavy focus on God. When we look at this idea of in New King James, New American Standard, the author and perfecter, this idea of authorship of our faith, He is the one that paved the way. He is the one that came, and we talked, and Mike did a good job of illustrating His way of life here on earth, that He did. Jesus come from heaven to this earth, and the reason why is, yes, to pave us a way for salvation, but He also gave us a way that we should follow. He is our example that we need to have in our life. As I mentioned, Hebrews chapter 11 deals with by faith Abraham, by faith Noah, by faith Moses, by faith. All of these people that we can look towards. And we can see how they lived their life. We can see, I need to improve in that area. That person struggled there. I need to do that, and I need to overcome that. And we see all these different in chapter 11. And then in chapter 12, the Hebrew writer says, Jesus is the author. He is the greater example of our life. He is the one that we need to mimic every single day of our life. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4 that we must measure up to the stature of Jesus Christ. He is our focus. And He needs to be our focus. When I was looking at the end of the race, when I was running 2 miles in the Army, And I remember seeing that end, and I remember seeing that time clock, that big time clock there, and I remember seeing my best time, and I know it fell short to some of you who are runners, but I remember seeing that time, and I saw, 13 or 14 minutes, and I thought, yes, it's my best time ever. And I picked up my pace, and I began to not feel the pain and the hurt that I was struggling with, the shortness of breath, the cramps in my legs, and I began to run harder. I began to run faster. I began to finish that because I knew at the end I would be able to stop running. I knew at the end I would be able to take the breath. I knew at the end I would be able to drink that cold water and enjoy that time. The question that I have for us to consider today, consider for 2020, is where's our focus? In 2019, where was your focus? Was your focus on how you could please yourself? Was it focusing on how you can, advance in your career? Was it focused on what you can get materialistic-wise? What was your focus? Was it people-pleasing? Was it self-focus? Second question that we have is, what are we going to put our focus in 2020? Are we going to strive to live a life that is pleasing to God? Are we going to, as it says on the banner, try to focus on His ways? Because His ways are higher than ours. The question is quite simple, and something that we all need to focus and deal with on a day-to-day basis. Are we serving God to the fullest, or are we letting Satan rule our life? There might be some here this morning who are struggling. They've lost their way. They have let things crowd their minds and become distracted. And they've chosen the life of sin. They've fallen away from church. Maybe you know someone who's fallen away from church. You want to reach out to them, but you don't know how. Well, we have a church here who can help you reach out to that person. There may be some here who are struggling with something that we don't even know. Some life-altering disease, life-altering situation, and you just need help. You need someone to lift that burden. Maybe you're saying, I can't lay this burden down. I can't lay this sin aside. I'm addicted to the sin, and I just need help. We have a great congregation here with good men and women who love you. And if you don't feel the love in this room, if you don't feel the love of this congregation, it's because you have turned your back to it. You've closed your blind eye to it. Because I can tell you from experience, I've heard and I've seen the love of this congregation. There's no judgment. If you need prayers for the church, come. Maybe you're willing to say, yes, Jesus, I want to make you Lord of my life. Yes, God, I want to give you my all. I want to lay everything down at your feet, and you want to be immersed in baptism. Well, our baptistry is prepared for you this morning. And we will rejoice along with the angels to see someone give their life over to God today. If you have a need, come as we stand and as we sing.
God is calling the prodigal, come without delay. Hear, oh, hear him calling, calling now for thee.